Okay, let's begin. We are now beginning Baruch Hashem, the third parak. So everyone repeat after me. Hadran alach, hakoreh lemafreya. We shall return to you, hakoreh lemafreya, that parak that we just finished. Okay, the people who compiled the Gemara have been extremely kind, and they've been arranging up until now the Gemara in bite-sized, class-sized pieces. So the Gemara and the Mishnah together is perfect size for one class. Well, it doesn't hold true, continuously, but for right now, every time we learn together, we were learning basically a Mishnah and the Gemara on that Mishnah. Okay, let's begin now. And this is an interesting Gemara and Mishnah, even though the Gemara is going to take a little bit longer to express and explain the answers in the Mishnah because it's very, very, very applicable. Let's begin. Hakoreh et Megillah, omed v'yoshev. Someone who reads the Megillah, omed, he's allowed to stand, v'yoshev, and he's allowed to sit. You could do either one. 21a2. He's allowed to stand, and he's allowed to sit. Whichever one he would like to do, he's allowed to do. We're going to see already that, according to some opinions, the idea, that is b'di'evid.
This is the koreh, the person who's reading for
the one who's reading for everybody else, okay? We know that everybody else is sitting. We know that from shul, right? But at least for this, it says hakoreh Megillah. The commentators point out that whenever you say hakoreh, it doesn't usually mean that a person should do that. It's like after the fact, someone who read the Megillah standing or sitting, good to go, right? It doesn't say koreh Megillah omed v'yoshev. It says hakoreh et Megillah. So what does that mean? Technically, in the first place, in other words, an ideal scenario, lichatechila, a person is allowed to sit down if they're reading privately. So you've all had a private Megillah reading before. The guy who's reading is allowed to sit when he's reading. When the person is reading for the keilah, for a big congregation, for kavod, he's supposed to stand. But it's not b'di'evet. It's not me'akev b'di'evet. So if he wound up sitting and he read for the whole shul, still the halacha is he's yotzeh. But that's why the Mishnah phrases hakoreh as a b'di'evet, because omed v'yoshev, that you could do either one you want, is not always true.
What constitutes something that makes you stand versus sit? Like I know Kiddush on Friday night we stand, Kiddush on Saturday we sit.
So not all of them are equal. So as an example, sometimes you'll find a reason where the reason why you have to stand, like why do we stand for Vaychulu? Friday night. Because you're giving testimony. And when witnesses would bear testimony, they would have to do it standing. In fact, many opinions hold you have to say Vaychulu with somebody else. You know that? Why? Because you can't do anything without two witnesses. So if you're witnessing that God is the creator of the world, then stand up and do it with two witnesses. Okay? So similar, Kiddush also carries in it that testimony. So there's different reasons in different cases. Over here, the reason for standing by the Megillah is actually more of a kavod out of respect for the tzibur than it is out of the hayuv for the Megillah. And that's why the Mishnah says you could read it either standing or sitting. Kara'a achar, one second. Kira'a echad, one person reads. Kira'u hashnayim, or two people read it, yatz'u. If one person reads it, or if two people read it at the same time, you're yotzei your obligation, okay? Why? Why is it that you could read it with one person or with two? Fascinating, actually. Because normally we have a halakha that says, when two people do anything, tre koli lo mishtami, which means two voices are not heard. When two things are happening simultaneously, your brain is trying to hear one or the other. Can't hear both at the same time.
You have two CEOs, you have none.
Exactly. It's a perfect example. Also, like the pasuk by Ben Soreru Moreh, that the parents have to speak in one voice. Why? Because they have to speak in one voice. If they're not speaking in one voice, of course the child's mixed up, okay?
Is this, daddy says that.
Exactly. I want you to do this. You listen to the school, don't listen to the school. So you have all these different competing voices. So there's an idea that when there's two voices, you don't hear either. So normally that's the case. Somehow, chidush in the Mishnah, if two people read the Megillah, that means if Shmuel is reading with Eliyahu, his son, two people reading together, yotzeh. Okay? Still, you fulfilled your obligation. In a place where the custom is to make a beracha on the Megillah, you should make the beracha. Place where there's not a custom to make a beracha on the Megillah, Lo yivarech. You should not make the beracha on the Megillah. Just to be clear, what are we talking about over here? There was a question of the minhag with regards to the beracha after the Megillah. The beracha that we make before the Megillah, all of that is halacha, and that's always the case that you would make the beracha. And also, there would not be a custom not to do the actual halacha. Also, if there was a place which had that custom not to make any berachot, you would not listen to their custom because that's patently wrong lahalacha. B'sheni v'chamishi b'Shabbat b'mincha korin shlosha. On Mondays and Thursdays and on Shabbat, specifically at mincha, what are we talking about? The reading of the Torah. How many people go up? 3 people go up. Now the Gemara is now going to go through all of the different amount of people that read with regards to each of the days of the holiday. So it's there's a particularly relevant Mishnah. So Sheni, Chamishi, Shabbat, Mincha, 3. En pochatim mehen, ve'en mosefin alehem. You don't do less, you don't do 2, and you don't do 4. Ve'en maftirim benavi, and you don't add the haftarah in Mincha on Shabbat, or on Monday and Thursday in the synagogue, you don't add a haftarah. In maftirim benavi. Now the Mishnah is going to say something that we don't hold like. Hapotech ve'achotem b'torah v'varech lefanei v'acharei. The first guy, Ya'ani the Kohen, and the last guy, Ya'ani the Israel. The first one makes the opening beracha, Asher b'harbanu. The last guy makes the last beracha, Asher natan lanu. Okay? Now there's 2 ways of understanding why that's the case, even though we do before and after each one. There's 2 ways of understanding why this would be the case. One opinion is that each one of the 3 olim, they have in mind to be yotzeh with the first person's aliyah, the Asher Bachar, and they have in mind to be yotzeh with the last guy's bracha, Asher Natan, and they fulfill their obligation that way. The other opinion says, no, Kohen, Levi, Israel are only 3 different parts of the same reading.
Right, because it's only Rishon. Because it makes up of Rishon, the section in the parasha. No?
But that's in the section of the parasha for Shabbat.
Right.
So in other words, the 3 people that are reading, 2 different opinions. Either it's 3 different mitzvot, in which case they're all fulfilling the obligation with that guy or the other guy, or it's 1 mitzvah and therefore it doesn't need individual brachot. What's the difference? Let's say, as an example, you go to a shul and the guy who gets Levi doesn't know he's getting Levi until after the Kohen went up. A lot of times you have a person gets called to the aliyah later. How could you have in mind to be yotzeh with the guys Asher b'harbanu when you didn't know you were Levi? Right? So the nafkamina would be in that case. If the guy did not know he was Levi, so in the first opinion, right, the first opinion says he has to be yotzeh with his bracha, now he's murfed. According to the second opinion, that it's one long thing, I didn't have to have in mind. He did the bracha for everybody and said the first part. I just got my aliyah as a Levi. Then the Israel came up, and then the Israel does the finishing bracha. But it's not like I have my own first and last requirement that I need to listen to yours. Okay.
So why don't we do both?
The Gemara is going to discuss why we changed from this in the Mishnah.
Can you explain the haftarah? Don't we read haftarahs from Navi?
Yes, but not on Sheni v'Chamishi and Shabbat Mincha.
We don't read haftarahs on those days always, though.
So
this
is where it's saying it's teaching it from here. Okay. We'll see in a minute why we would have thought that way, why we would have thought you should do. Okay? The Mishnah continues. So Rosh Chodesh and Chol HaMoed, how many people do you have? You don't go less and you don't go more. So let's already discuss now why that's the case. Since Monday, Thursday are days of the work week, so to add on extra olim in that context is Torah Tzibur. It's too much. They got to get to work. You're adding an extra aliyah, a 4th aliyah, in Musifin. You don't add another aliyah because of Torah Tzibur. What about Shabbat Mincha? Also, they've been sitting here studying Torah for ages, the whole day. That's what it used to be like. They would study Torah the whole day. They would. Morris.
Yes, sorry.
We need you on mute if you're going to talk out loud. That's not a question with a Morris Beni Kachu Omer. Okay? So the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, that's Torah Tzibur. When it comes to the fact that they learn the whole Shabbat afternoon, Torah Tzibur. So we don't add an extra aliyah. By the way, here's the proof that Torah Tzibur is even for a relatively short thing. Why? How long does it take to do an extra aliyah of 3 pesukim?
3 minutes.
3 minutes, 2 minutes. So sometimes you say, I'll get over it, it's only 2 minutes. Torah Tzibur, you see, from this Mishnah, is even relevant for the size of the smallest possible aliyah. Okay, which could take 2 minutes. So you see, Torah Tzibur is even relevant in a short amount of time. So what about Rosh Chodesh? Rosh Chodesh is a work day. Yes, it's not asur to work on Rosh Chodesh. So therefore, on Rosh Chodesh, we don't say Torah Tzibur. Okay?
We have a fourth Aliyah.
So therefore, sorry?
We have a fourth.
We have a fourth because of whatever reason. We're going to add one. We'll see why. But you can't have a fifth and a sixth. Okay. So still it has the halacha of en pochatin ve'en mosifin. Whatever the halacha is, you do. You don't know rakeh, like they say. No adding of aliyot on Rosh Chodesh and Chol HaMoed. Why on Chol HaMoed no? Yeah, why on Chol HaMoed not?
Not supposed to
We're
work.
not worried about them going to work that day.
So right, what you don't have. One would think that you don't have that same answer.
You're supposed to be happy and joyful, and some people may get upset it takes so long.
I like that you're saying that. But the answer, the actual answer is that Chol HaMoed, even though work is forbidden in terms of certain melachot, the idea of work is not forbidden.
Right. If it expires, you could do it.
There's elements of work that are mutar, right? It's just that you can't do this kind of work or that kind of work. But a person could potentially be working.
Like trading, if you're going to lose out on a trade, right?
That's a davar ha'aved, exactly. So there's certain things that would allow you to do work. Shabbat doesn't have that idea, davar ha'aved, that you got it on sale, you're allowed to shop on Chol HaMoed, right? Yeah, it's a mu'katan. Yeah, all right. So also on those days we say the halacha of Torah Tzibur, so we don't add, we don't take away. Hapotech ve'achotem b'Torah mevarech lefanei ve'acharei. Same thing. Ve'en maftirim b'Navi. Also, you don't add the haftarah of the Navi on Rosh Chodesh and on Chol HaMoed. Hapotech ve'achotem b'Torah. Same thing. You don't. The person who starts the berachot says the first beracha. The person who ends the berachot says the last beracha. And either everyone fulfills their obligation or it's one block chiyuv. Says the Mishnah. This is the general rule, and every time we see those words, this is the general rule. After you just told me the actual rule, you then ask, what did you add by saying this is the general rule, like we saw in the last Mishnah? Exactly. Kol sheyesh bo musaf ve'eno yom tov korin arba. Any day which has musaf, but is not a halachic yom tov, korin bo arba. Now, what days are those? Rosh Chodesh and Chol HaMoed. So you just told me what the halakha is, and then you're like, this is the rule. What did you add by telling me this is the rule that you didn't literally just say 1 second before? The Gemara, the Mishnah now continues. Okay, so that's on a day that's not Yom Tov. What about a day that is Yom Tov? Be Yom Tov, Chamisha. On Yom Tov, we bring up 5 people to the Torah. So we don't yet know why 4, why 3, why 4, or why 5. We'll get to each one, right? On Yom Tov, you have people read 5. Yom HaKippurim,
6.
Shisha, 6. Okay? B'Shabbat, 7. 7. By the way, you ever hear when they say in synagogue, they're like, Chovat Hayom. What's Chovat Hayom mean?
It's the last one that's obligated.
That's Chamishi. So every time, and when you see that, that's this Mishnah. So when they say Aliyat Chamishi, Chovat Hayom, that's because you call 5 Aliyot on this day. Shishi on Yom Kippur is Chovat Hayom. Sorry?
I said after that's to ring the register.
Inshallah. Okay. Shabbat, Shiva on Shabbat. On Shabbat, Shiva. On Shabbat, you have 7. Okay? 7 aliyot. Again, we'll see why the numbers are 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. The Gemara says the same idea. En pochatim mehen aval mosifin. You can't do less than 7, but you could add. Now, there's a question over here. Is this last modifying factor, en pochatim mehen, is that telling you, but you could add, you can't do less, but you could add? Is that telling you just on Shabbat you can't do 6, but you could do 8? Or is that telling you that you're allowed to add on Shabbat and on Yom Tov and on Yom Kippur? Because all of those, all of those the Mishnah did not say en pochatim ve'en mosifin. We said en pochatim ve'en mosifin by Monday, Thursday, Shabbat, Mincha. We said en pochatin ve'en, ve'en mosifin, by Rosh Chodesh Chol HaMoed. Then we gave a few, Yom Tov, which is 4, which is 5, Yom Kippur, which is 6, and Shabbat, which is 7, and then we gave this rule of en pochatin, aval mosifin. So either it's going back on the last 3, because it didn't say the same thing it said by the other ones, that you can't add and you can't subtract, or it's only referring to Shabbat. And the machloket seems to stem around the fact that do we say that it's one of the defining features of Shabbat to be able to express Shabbat's superior holiness to everything else? That's the opinion that you could only add on Shabbat but not on the other holidays. And the other opinion says, no, on all of these, we're allowed to be able to add and subtract. And what would the logic be? There's no work on Yom Tov, Yom Kippur, and Shabbat. Okay? The Gemara now, the Mishnah now continues. Umaftirim benavi. And we read from the Navi. So the question I had over here is that there is an opinion that says that clause of pochatim ve'en mosifin, en pochatim ba'aval mosifin is only going on Shabbat, right?
Is it because you could add to Shabbat? Like if I want to accept Shabbat early,
You could also add to Yom Tov.
Oh, but over there we said Yom Tov you can add to the Aliyah too. I mean we could add on Yom Tov also.
No, that's the question. That's exactly the question. It doesn't say by Yom Tov pochatim. It just says after Shabbat that you're allowed to add. And the question is that only Shabbat, which would mean on Yom Tov you can't? Or is it including Yom Tov? Okay? So what's interesting, right, exactly. What's interesting over here is that Umaftirim ben Navi, when it comes to the Haftarah of the Navi, right? We read the Navi on every holiday. According to the opinion that brief pause of pochatim mehem aval mosifim mehen means also Yom Tov, then it makes sense that what comes after that, umaftirim menavi, would also be for Yom Tov. But it would be really weird to say that this clause is only for Shabbat. So you broke what came before. And then the next thing, which says umaftirim menavi, that's going on the things before. So it makes it a little bit more difficult to follow that opinion that says that you're not allowed to add on Yom Tov only on Shabbat, because then Maftirim Menavi should also go that way as well. Same thing again, the Mishnah says, the first and last guy make the berachot. Okay, let's get into the Gemara. The Gemara says as follows. Tana, ma she'enken b'Torah. What did we just learn, right? That the Megillah you're able to read whether you're standing or sitting. But when it comes Masha'enken b'Torah, when it comes to the Torah, that the halacha is not that way. A person has to stand when they're reading the Torah for the Kehillah. Okay? Now, remember, we said earlier that there's a machloket about how we understand the Mishnah. Did the Mishnah mean that you could stand or sit whatever? Or did the Mishnah mean, no, b'di'evet, if you read the Megillah already and you were sitting, they fulfilled their obligation?
You just told us.
I said that there's two opinions.
The way that it's read.
I said there's two opinions. The one opinion says because it says hakoreh, so we read it as a b'di'evet. Okay. Now again, remember this. So when the Mishnah is saying over here that it's not the halacha with regards to the Torah, we really have to figure which opinion does this Gemara? What does this Gemara mean according to those opinions? Does it mean that the Megillah you're allowed to do it lechatechila, and in the Torah you're not allowed to do it lechatechila? Or does it mean that only b'di'evet by Megillah you're allowed to sit? So when it comes to the Torah, if you sat, you haven't been yotzeh at all, right? So it would kind of depend on how you started your understanding of the Mishnah. The Gemara says, how do you know that when you're reading Torah it has to be that way? You have to stand. The Pasuk says, V'ata po amodi madi. Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, you stand here with me, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is teaching Moshe Rabbeinu Torah. So you see that the process of reading, of reciting Torah requires standing. If the Pasuk did not say so explicitly, we would never be able to say this. A lot of times the Pasuk will say, the Gemara will say something like this about something that you could never fathom saying out of your mouth. Like God appeared like a bush. What does that mean? If not for the fact that Pasuk said it explicitly, I would never be able to say something like this. But when the Pasuk does say it, so what can I say? That's what the Pasuk says. So in other words, we're saying something that without the Pasuk explicitly saying it, it would beg a belief to even say something like this.
Hashem was standing.
Kaviyachol, afakadosh baruch hu ba'amidah. So too, right? Because what does the Pasuk say? Ve'ata po, you stand here, amod, imadi, with me. It says I'm standing too. Wow. So it's almost like God had to stand. And that's why it's like unbelievable to fathom. The idea that there's something that God needs to respect to the point that God needs to stand, right? That's hard to even think of.
It's like when we learned that Hashem came out to greet Bnei Israel on Har Sinai.
Yeah.
It's like, it just shows, like, if Hashem is willing, it needs to do that, then all the more so.
So what's interesting is that over there, I find it easier. I'll tell you why. Over there, it's a matter of God showing love.
Right, because he
So
wants
it's-
to go to greet Bnei Israel.
Exactly. It's like, let me give you an example. It's like, imagine a father stands up when his kid comes into the room from school. Father stands up, goes, runs, and gives him a hug. No one thinks that the father's honoring the child.
No, it's love.
It's out of love.
But if he stood up when he walked into the room, it's weird.
It would be weird, right? Now let's make it weirder. Let's say, as an example, the father wrote a letter to his son. He gave this kid the letter, and the kid is sitting down. The father says to the son, I wrote you a letter. You're going to read it sitting down. You should stand up. And all of a sudden, the kid sees that the father's also standing up for the letter that he wrote. That's weird. What makes it holy is the fact that you wrote it.
Right.
Right? So the Torah's holiness is subservient to God's holiness. So why would God need to stand for the honor of the Torah? It is holy because it's his words.
But is he standing
Yeah?
with Moshe? He's standing with Moshe, not standing for Moshe.
He's not standing for Moshe, but he's standing for the Torah.
Right.
So that's, I think, why the Gemara is like, if not for having a pasuk, like this would be very hard to say. That God is obligated to stand for the Torah. Okay? So that's what he's saying. You see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu must have been teaching us that in the teaching over, in the reading over of Torah, that requires standing. And God was modeling like God does. The Gemara says that God does the mitzvot of his own Torah. So God was modeling what one should do. We'll see maybe, hopefully in a little while, we'll maybe see another alternate understanding about what the Gemara is actually saying over here. Okay? V'amar Rabbi Avau. Rabbi Avau taught also as well. Minayin larav shelo yeshev al gabe mita v'yishanel talmidav al gabe karka. How do we know that a rabbi shouldn't be sitting high and mighty on some mattress, like placed on the floor, high, and they're all sitting on the ground? V'ata po amodi madi. Because you see also that God, when he taught Moshe Rabbeinu, he stood and he also stood. So the Torah, Kaviyachol, teaches us that what did God say should be the relationship between a teacher and the student? The teacher should place himself in the same place as the student.
Equal level.
On equal level as the student. Okay? Tana Rabbanan, we learn, Mimot Moshe ad Rabban Gamliel, from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu until Rabban Gamliel, Lo hayu lomdin Torah ele me'omad. The Gemara is really now asking the unasked question. If you just told me that in order to teach Torah, in order to learn from Torah, God and Moshe had to stand, what are we doing? How are we sitting? You know what the answer is? The answer is true. The Gemara says that from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu until Rabban Gamliel lived around the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, okay? They would never sit when they were learning Torah.
Who put the benches in? Rabbi Gamliel put benches in? Didn't we learn that he puts benches in?
Rabban Gamliel.
Oh, wow.
That was his time.
Okay? Rabban Gamliel. Lo hayu lemedin Torah ela me'omad. They would only learn when they were standing.
Company.
Mishemit Rabban Gamliel, when Rabban Gamliel died, Yarat Holi La'olam, weakness, sickness descended to the world, V'hayu lemedin Torah miyushav, and they started learning Torah sitting down. So what we're experiencing, this fatigue, this lack of energy, the Gemara is defining as choli, as a sickness. There was a time when when we were healthy enough, strong enough to be able to have the process of learning happen only standing.
Because we lost it when Rabbi Gamliel died?
No, that was like the marker.
Well, that happened.
That was the time at which it transpired. V'hainu d'tanan, and that's what it means when it says Mishemit Rabban Gamliel batel kavod Torah. When Rabban Gamliel passed away, the kavod for Torah stopped. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that people stopped kissing the Torah. It means the kavod of Torah, that people would be strict, that when they were standing, that when they were learning Torah, they would stand. That was no longer the case. Okay? The Gemara says, okay, 1 second. Katuv echad omer, one pasuk says, ve'eshev bahar. Moshe Rabbeinu says, and I sat on the mountain. Ve'katuv echad omer, ve'anochi omed bahar. And I'm standing on the mountain. Which one was Moshe doing? Was he sitting or was he standing? Amarav, omed vilomed, he would stand and learn, yoshev vishoneh. Then he would sit and review what he'd learned. So already the Gemara just gave us an indication that when we talked about standing for learning, we were talking about learning something for the first time. You hear that? Because the Gemara is reconciling the contradiction of it says Moshe was standing, it says Moshe was sitting. What was he doing? What's the answer? The answer is when he was learning something, he was standing. When he would sit down then and review. Reviewing is also learning. But the idea of standing for learning was
For new information.
for new information, which answers a very obvious question. A question that Jonah was already kind of at the precipice of asking. What does it mean, Rabban Gamliel and the benches of his Bet Midrash, if they only started sitting after he died?
Right, it's reviewing information. It's not new.
The answer is, even in the time of Rabban Gamliel, they still were using the benches, just not when they were learning something new. They were Yoshev Vishoneh. Okay? I was thinking something also very interesting. It says, and you will teach et Devarim ha'eleh, right? Teach Devarim ha'eleh, right? To your children, when you're on the road, b'shoch becha uvkumecha, when you're lying down and when you're getting up. But if you're teaching words of Torah, how could you lie down?
It's reviewing.
Vishinantam levanecha, Yoshev vishoneh. So if it's vishoneh, you're allowed to be sitting. Chidush. And that's why you could have limadtem otam, you could teach them these words, right? Because vishinantam levanecha, and you're teaching it over to your children. It's not the first time they're learning. If it's the first time they're learning, then they would be required to stand. Now, let's be clear. Sorry?
We should all be standing right now. Except for you.
No, you missed it. You missed it.
After Rabban Gamliel,
Moshe Rabbeinu was already sitting for the review.
I call this week.
Moshe Rabbeinu was already sitting when he was reviewing.
I'm saying it's new.
So what was he standing when it was new? No, that's my point. So when Rabban Gamliel was alive, what were they doing? Standing for new, sitting for review. Right. At the time when Rabban Gamliel died, everybody got weak, and then when were they sitting? Always. So we're almost 2,000 years after Rabban Gamliel. Right?
No, we were saying we're weak.
Before we stand up at all.
No, that was the point. We're saying we're weak.
Okay, yeah. I'm just saying you can't prove from this that you're weak.
Can't be from new.
Because even Rabbi Gamliel at his time, right after that, it was Batil Kavod Torah, which I thought was also very interesting. Can I explain why? Let's say the people were weak. So that's Batil Kavod Torah.
That's enough.
They're not strong enough. It's not that they didn't respect the Torah. It's that they're not strong enough. So it should say, Batel Koach HaTorah, or something like that. What is Batel Kavod HaTorah?
Because you should act what we learn, that you like a lion and you go things that way. So it should be that the extra oomph I'm standing for it. If we're showing that they're weak or they didn't have respect, it's because they didn't. It's not the extra push.
So close. If they had the proper kavod, then they would have the proper koach. If someone that you respected to that, if God walked in, what you say? I'm too weak, I can't.
What's
Dicha, I can't get out. Chavovadia walks in, you're jumping out of your chair.
the pasuk that says, if you knew who you were standing in front of? I was just in this shul in Zurich. Yeah.
Ta'alef ne'mi ata omed.
Yeah, if you knew who you were standing in front of.
So you stand there, you're giving a chidush in the pasuk. What does the pasuk mean? The pasuk means you should know in front of whom you stand. Stanley's saying a beautiful chap in the pasuk. He's saying a big chidush. He's saying, Da lifnei mi, if you knew who in front of you was standing, then you would be standing. Yeah, it's a big chidush.
The whole time.
So very good. That's an example of this Batel Kivod Torah. And by the way, I think that that's something which is very important. A lot of times, people are very busy teaching their children Torah, but they don't spend enough time teaching their kids Kavod Torah.
How do you do that?
Making a huge deal when a sefer falls on the floor about the kissing it. Making everyone in the family kiss it.
Right.
That's an example of Kavod Torah. Not just what I learned. Sefer Torah was standing. A Talmid Chacham, a rabbi walks in the room, you stand. Every time he walks in and out, you stand again. Illustrating that there's this unbelievable reverence that I have for Torah, for Talmidei Chachamim. It's so important. The people that you have the hardest time working with their kids when the kids have problems are the kids who never saw respect for rabbis from their parents. Why? Because the kid, he's like this. Okay, rabbi said that, so what? There's no built-in kavod. And if there's no built-in kavod, then you don't take it seriously.
Can't benefit from anything you don't respect.
100%. 100%. And especially if you're trying to do it with strength. Okay? Let's continue. The Gemara says, Rabbi Chanina Amar, Rabbi Chanina taught, Lo omed v'lo yoshev ela shocheh. He would not stand, not sit, rather he was bowing. So what does that mean? That he was bowing? He's half standing, half sitting. So that's why it says one time like this and one time like that. So according to the second opinion, it's not that Moshe Rabbeinu was sitting. Moshe never sat.
He was always halfway.
He was always bending halfway. By the way, that's harder than standing.
It is, you break your back.
You break your back is killing. Shema Yisrael, for 40 days, he's like this. Unbelievable. Right? According to this opinion. So that's why it says one time, Anochi Yoshev, one time it says, Anochi Omed.
Wouldn't bowing be extra kavod?
Yes. It doesn't say that there's no kavod in Moshe.
No, I'm saying it's a higher level than
Higher level than standing.
is the bowing, yeah?
Yeah.
Got it.
It's just reconciling the fact that there's a contradiction in the Pesukim. Okay? Now, once that's pshat by Moshe Rabbeinu, now we wonder what went on by Rabban Gamliel. Because according to Rabbi Chanina, there's no differentiation made between learning something the first time and learning something the second time. So
Bowing the whole time.
he's bowing the whole time. So let's say time went on and they got weaker and they weren't doing that. But when did they start sitting? That Rabban Gamliel had benches that then when Rabban Gamliel died, they sat on them. What were they doing before that? Why were there benches in Rabban Gamliel's Beit Midrash? The answer might be, there's interesting halacha, a person's not allowed to eat in a Beit Knesset. But in a Beit Midrash, you're allowed to eat. Maybe the benches were for the people, ben hasdarim, in between when they were learning, just to relax, just to sit down for a few minutes, in order to
When you say
to
Beit
recover.
Knesset, is that like the sort of
the synagogue.
what you only qualify that as like the room upstairs as an example?
In this building, yes. There are some synagogues where the Beit Knesset, let's say as an example, we didn't have upstairs. All we had was this. What would you call this?
Both.
This is both. You see? So in here, you'd be allowed to eat. In there, it's much more complex to say that you're allowed to eat.
Unless you study up there.
Even more so,
Even if
you
you
wouldn't
study.
be studying,
But the
right?
question is this a study room? Why? Because when you pray, there's times when you pray and then you leave. So when they instituted the synagogue in a way where they were like, why would you be eating here? You're going to pray Shacharit Mincha Nabi. When you're sitting in a midrash, you could sit and learn the whole day. So it makes sense that the guy's going to have a drink, he's going to eat something.
Right. That's why this would qualify. There's also all the books are here.
Yeah.
So they instituted it in a way where that was allowed from the beginning.
Right.
Okay? Let's continue. Rabbi Yochanan says, En yeshiva ela lashon akava. Yeshiva only means, doesn't mean that Moshe Rabbeinu said he was sitting in the Shamayim. He means I was stationed there. I was present there. Okay? Shneimar, like it says, Vateshvu bakadesh yamim rabim. And the Jewish people stayed, they rested, they camped, right? In Kadesh for many days, for a very, very long time. Okay? So it doesn't mean that they sat in Kadesh for a very, very long time. It means that that's where they were dwelling, that's where they were living, that's where they were staying. By the way, very interesting, the halacha says that if a person goes into the sukkah, and they say the bracha, leshev basukah, do they stand and then sit? Lechatechila, Chamuvalya says, it's a nice thing to do. Better to do it that way. But many people, that's not the minhag, and they don't do it.
Just stay sitting.
Stay sitting. Or, what happens if you don't have a seat? You're standing in the shul's sukkah, jammed. You have to fulfill the mitzvah, there's no seats. Can I make a leshev basukah and eat my roll? Yes.
Oh, I think it's saying now.
Yes,
Dwelling.
because we learn, Chamuvadia says halacha, we learn that the word yeshiva does not mean to sit. Basukot teshvu shivat yamim doesn't mean sit in a sukkah 7 days. It means dwell in a sukkah. So I also dwell in my house standing. Okay? So therefore, you see the confluence of this opinion of Rabbi Yochanan and yeshiva, meaning to dwell and not specifically to sit. So Rabbi Yochanan answers the question on Moshe Rabbeinu that way. It says one time he's standing in the mountain. It says one time he's sitting on the mountain for 40 days. The answer is no. Moshe Rabbeinu was saying, I dwelled in the mountain for 40 days, but there's no contradiction between the fact that it says yeshiva and the fact that it says Amidah. Rava says, Rakot me'umad v'kashot miyushav. When it came to parts that were rakot, that was soft, Torah learning, easy to learn, Moshe Rabbeinu was standing. When it came time for the sugya, that was very difficult for Moshe Rabbeinu to understand, the hard portions of Torah, for that Moshe Rabbeinu was sitting. Now, why is that not a problem? When we said before that you learned it standing, and that when you reviewed it sitting, we said that that's not a breach in Kavod Torah. Why? Because Moshe Rabbeinu, he stood for everything that he learned. It's just that now he was reviewing, so now he's only reviewing. Okay? Over here though, something which is harder, you don't give as much respect to stand for. What's the answer? The answer is, when is sitting intimating a lack of respect? When I'm sitting because I can't be bothered to stand. When I'm sitting because I need to conserve my strength to be able to focus more, that's not a lack of kavod. That is the kavod.
Because you care so much about it, you have to sit.
You ever go to what's it called, sitting in conversation, and you're standing, the guy wants to have a real serious conversation. What does he say to you?
Let's sit down.
Come on, sit down. And if you're like, no, it's okay, I'm fine. The guy's like, no, please. Sit down. I need you, this is very important. I think you need to sit down. Take a seat, right? There's an element of sitting, of conserving strength, of focusing, of not having your muscles think about that drives attention even stronger. So when Moshe Rabbeinu was dealing with the more difficult sugyot, Moshe Rabbeinu had to sit. And that was actually kavod for the Torah and not a lack of kavod for Torah. Interesting example of this. Are you allowed to bring tefillin into the bathroom? No. How about if you're on a flight, you come back from the flight, you get off the flight, you have your briefcase with you, you have to go to the bathroom now. You leave it with a friend, right? Yep. What happens if you don't have a friend? What do? Take it with you inside? Yeah. Leave it outside.
Hold it in.
You can't. Also asur.
Don't you have, even if you have the closures and everything like that, you have 3 cases on the...
Let's say you don't have it, but even if you do have it,
take it with you.
The halacha is you're allowed to take it with you.
Take it in.
Why? Why? The reason you don't bring it into the bathroom is kavod. You leave it outside, they get stolen.
On the floor. It's worse to put it on the floor.
Even if it's not on the floor.
Yeah, you lose
someone's going to steal it.
You don't have it, there's no kavod.
Yeah, what kind of kavod is it going to be when the guy takes the tefillin and chucks it in the garbage?
Wow.
Right?
That's
so
crazy.
Sometimes kavod requires you to do things that are the opposite of kavod. But it illustrates kavod because it shows that of these two, I'm choosing the better of the two. Moshe Rabbeinu sitting for the difficult sugya, I always felt that when I saw this Gemara, big smile on my face. Why?
It's like there, but it's not there. Like there's like a whole
Why?
here.
Because even Moshe Rabbeinu found some parts of Torah hard.
No, it's better.
Isn't that why there's spaces in the Torah?
To review, to give us time to be able to process 100%. But maybe you could say about that maybe Moshe wrote it for us.
We learned that
Right.
Here we're learning that Moshe had the best Rebbe ever. Who? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And even with the best Rebbe ever and the best student ever, there are parts of Torah that are they're difficult, hard.
The crowns when he goes to the class of Rabbi Akiva. It says, who's this person and what's the concept?
I don't know that would constitute hard. Because it says over here, rakot, soft, and hard, the kashot, difficult. Tagin was just a lack of knowledge. He didn't know what it was. I don't know if that would classify, that's a lack of factual knowledge. Kashot means that something is difficult. When you learn, sometimes you learn something and it's like just getting it down, understanding the idea, working it out. You're like sweating. You learn Yevamot, you're tearing your hair out.
But can you focus better if you're sitting? So
Let's
maybe
make sure that's not the next one.
We'll do a couple of Masechtot before we get there. Okay? Yeah, sorry?
focus better if you're sitting. Like, not that it's hard, meaning I need to pay more attention to this.
Correct. And that's what he's saying. The first opinion wasn't buying this. Nope. If you respected it enough,
Stand up.
you'd be able to stand up and you'd be able to focus. Okay. The Gemara continues. Kara'a echad, kara'a shetayim. 1 second. No, I think we're done. Okay, we'll pick up from here.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.